What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through a few sell high players after week 2 of the fantasy football season. So these are just players that maybe I think have overperformed either this week or for the first 2 weeks, and I think you're going to be better off moving off of these players to maybe guys that have underperformed, players you can buy low on, kind of flip overachieving players for players that are going to boom moving forward, or just guys that I think maybe their production is going to fall off. If you guys enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe. If you want to check out my waiver wire video, that's out. My buy low players, that is out also. But let's dive into my first sell high player. And this might be a little controversial. I know a lot of people really like him. It is going to be Derrick Henry. And this was a fine game from Derrick Henry. 18 carries, 84 yards, a rushing touchdown, 1 reception for 12 yards. Sounds like a pretty solid stat line. Got into the end zone, was efficient on the ground, but it still only led to 16.6 PPR fantasy points. And I just think at this point in Derrick Henry's career, his name value carries a lot more weight than what I think he can actually provide for you for fantasy. We know the receiving usage is always going to be super limited. He's caught 30 balls 1 time in his career. The Ravens also just don't target the running back position. I don't think this is shocking. Derrick Henry is not going to be a high volume pass catcher here for the Ravens. And we've seen in the past, Derrick Henry has been able to overcome that lack of receiving usage with his insane rushing volume. He averaged over 20 carries a game from 2019 through 2022, so the receiving usage wasn't there, but he was getting into the end zone, and he was just being force-fed an insane amount of usage week after week. And I think it's also pretty clear this year that that volume is probably not going to be there. I don't think the Ravens want to run him into the ground. I don't think they want to give him 20 plus carries a game like we were seeing in his time with the Tennessee Titans. And I think we have also seen early on in the season that his usage is heavily dependent on the game script. In week 1, we saw the Ravens went down to the Chiefs. They were, trying to mount a comeback, and he was outsnapped by Justice Hill. We saw a pretty competitive game script against the Raiders, and Derrick Henry was actually outsnapped once again by Justice Hill in week 2. This is kind of a shakeup here for the Ravens because last year they had the highest point differential in the NFL. Their average game was a win by 11.6 points. So the game script was always super solid. For Gus Edwards, he was able to rack up some rushing volume. He would have the touchdown upside. And that type of week in, week out game script would be pretty awesome for Derrick Henry. Like if they were just cruising, winning by 10 plus points every single week, that would be a great spot for Derrick Henry. But this 2024 Ravens team is 0-2. They somehow just lost to the Raiders in week 2. And now they're lined up to play the Cowboys, Bills, and the Bengals in the next 3 weeks. So they've started off 0-2. They haven't been able to, mount these huge leads where Derrick Henry can just, run the ball to ice out the game. And I don't know if they're going to be able to do that moving forward, at least in the short term, with those next 3 matchups. So I feel like with what we've seen, his usage, his lack of ceiling because of the receiving game, I feel like his ceiling at this point is like 17, 18 PPR points per game, and that's if he smashes in the touchdown department. Like this last week was pretty solid, 16.6, but there are going to be games where if the Ravens struggle, he's going to be 10, 11, 12 carries, inefficient, limited receiving work, and if he doesn't get into the end zone, he's just going to be a complete bust in your fantasy football lineup. So I feel like when you factor in the kind of lower ceiling, you also factor in the risk he has at his age with the amount of tread he has on his tires, from those crazy workload seasons in Tennessee. With the name value, I'd be looking to move off of him. I really like the idea of tearing up to a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs. Obviously, you're going to need to give something on top of Derrick Henry or, take a position L, on another spot for another swap. I think James Cook probably could have been done before this week. After his huge game, might be tough to swing that. Josh Jacobs, if you can get close to an even swap, I would like that. But I really would be looking to try to, either do a 1-for-1 for Derrick Henry or try to tier up into those next, grouping of running backs. I just think the ceiling's not there. The name still carries a lot of weight. I'd be looking to pivot off of him. Now, the next sell high player is going to be a wide receiver, and it is going to be Calvin Ridley. And this was a very impressive game out of Ridley in a bad matchup. 6 targets, 4 receptions, 77 receiving yards, a receiving touchdown, and then also added a 10-yard rushing touchdown. Like I said, tough matchup against the Jets. That crazy deep touchdown catch he had, that was on Sauce Gardner. That was an amazing play. He put up 24.7 PPR points. I just feel like we're in a spot here where we saw Will Levis last year. We've seen him through 2 weeks. I don't really want to be hitching my wagon to Will Levis, and I kind of feel like that's where we're at here with Calvin Ridley. It has not been encouraging through 2 weeks, and these have been 2 weeks where Calvin Ridley is the clear-cut wide receiver one. I do think he's going to be the top guy throughout the rest of the season, but we do have DeAndre Hopkins working his way back. I know he came into the season injured. He might be dust at this point, but it's still something I think, we should at least be a little bit concerned with when it comes to Calvin Ridley, because if you now have two capable wide receivers on a passing attack that's not all that great, that is somewhat concerning. So I feel like you're in a spot here with Calvin Ridley where you can pivot to an underperforming wide receiver in a better situation. I talked about guys like Chris Olave, Brandon Ayuk in my buy low video. I mean, either of those straight up would be amazing. I don't think you're going to get that unless someone's really freaking out on Ayuk Olave, but I'd be willing to give up Calvin Ridley plus to move into that like Chris Olave, Brandon Ayuk tier. Some other struggling wide receivers. This is obviously before the Monday night game. I'd take Drake London. I would take DJ Moore. I'd even take Tank Dell. That might be controversial, but I'm still very in on Tank Dell, even after, the rough 2-game start here. So for Calvin Ridley, I just think it's a nice opportunity. He's coming off a big game. I don't really want to be attached to this Titans offense. So you can pivot, get a player who maybe hasn't lived up to expectations through 2 weeks, but could definitely be a better option moving forward. And then the third and final sell high player for me is going to be Devin Singletary. And I feel like if you drafted Singletary, he's done his job through 2 weeks. Week 1, 9.2 PPR points, fine. Week 2, 14.5 PPR points. The opportunities have been solid. The workload's there. 10 carries, 5 targets week 1, 16 carries, 1 target in week 2. I feel like there's kind of like one major red flag here with his usage, and that is that Tyrone Tracy looks to be the goal line back. Not really shocking considering Singletary's pretty small, 5'7", 200. Tyrone Tracy's 5'11", 210. But I think another concerning part here, you already have Tyrone Tracy, taking the goal line snaps. Tracy also took 3 of the 7 third down snaps in week 2. So on a bad offense, really any holes in like a workhorse running back's usage can significantly lower their ceiling and floor. Because if you're on a bad offense, the touchdown upside is already limited. If you're losing out on the limited touchdowns they're already going to be, that's not great. If Singletary's now potentially losing out on some of that receiving usage also, that's kind of a tough break here. So I feel like through 2 weeks, he's been serviceable. He's been good enough where I think you could probably get a decent return for him. One guy I really like as a buy low option at the running back position is Zach Moss. Now, if your league mate is sharp, they're going to know the usage was great for Zach Moss, but if they're just looking at the fantasy point number, like week 2, Zach Moss was terrible, Singletary was way better, but the usage for Zach Moss was great. So if you can go straight up 1-for-1, even give up a little something extra with Devin Singletary to get Zach Moss, I like it. Some other targets I like, Brian Robinson, Tony Pollard. You're obviously going to have to put a little something on top of Devin Singletary if you do want those deals. But I feel like with Singletary, he's fine with where you drafted him, but I do feel like there are routes where he could lose his fantasy relevancy. So if you can flip him plus another piece or take a minor downgrade somewhere else to pivot to a running back that I think is going to be a more long-term option, of like a safer guy moving forward, I think it could make some sense to do that. So those are going to be my 3 sell high players here. We have Derrick Henry, Calvin Ridley, and Devin Singletary. Let me know your thoughts. If you have any fantasy questions, drop them down below. I'll make sure to get back to you as soon as I can. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.